Today I'm going to talk to you about Ivan Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning and how that relates to learning. Essentially, classical conditioning is a learning process where associations are made between environmental stimuli and naturally occurring stimuli. Ivan Pavlov came across this theory when he was studying digestion in dogs. And what happened was Pavlov would present dogs with meat powder, which would create salivation. Now this is a natural reflex. It occurs without any type of learning taking place. But later, he would ring a bell, present the meat powder, and that would create salivation in the dogs. And eventually, what happened was some type of learning took place, and the dogs came to realize when they heard the bell, it was time to salivate without the presence of the meat powder. So what Pavlov did was he took the meat powder, which is an unconditioned stimulus, and saw that it caused salivation, which is an unconditioned response. Being unconditioned, that means that it was caused by a reflex and no type of learning had to take place. But as he introduced the bell, something happened. The bell was a neutral stimulus. It didn't mean anything to the dogs. When they heard the bell ring, that didn't mean anything to them. But then there was the presentation of the meat powder, which was still an unconditioned stimulus, and created salivation, which was still an unconditioned response. But once this learning took place, and the dogs learned that something was up when the bell rang, the bell became what we would call a conditioned stimulus, and the salivation, because there was no need for a dog to salivate at the sound of a bell, except that it had become a conditioned response. So that's an example of classical conditioning in animals. But what about humans? Does classical conditioning occur in humans? Can anyone think of examples from their own lives where classical conditioning has taken place? Okay, let's start with the reflex example. Okay, give me something that is a naturally occurring reflex in humans. Okay, smelling chili cooking. Now what makes that natural? What makes that a reflex? Because it makes you feel hungry. Okay. So label these. What is smelling chili cooking? Right, the unconditioned stimulus, and becoming hungry at that scent, right, that's the unconditioned response. But can anyone tell me how classical conditioning occurs? Right now we're still just talking about a reflex. Can anyone give me an example of why this would be classical conditioning? Okay, good. So, you eat chili, you get food poisoning. And this food poisoning causes some type of learning to take place. Okay, that's good. How so? Explain it to me. What happens? Okay. You smell chili cooking. And you become nauseated, okay? So still, where do I see the connection to classical conditioning? Where do I see that this learning has taken place? Okay. One time you smell chili cooking and you become hungry, that's a reflex. But after you eat that chili, you experience food poisoning. So the next time you smell chili cooking, the chili cooking becomes a conditioned stimulus, and you become nauseated, and that becomes the conditioned response as a result of some type of learning, the food poisoning, and you've learned, I don't want to eat chili again. So that's a really good example of classical conditioning in humans. Hopefully you'll overcome that and not stay a chili phobic, and you'll enjoy chili again. But most of us have experienced this example. to where, something's happened, either stomach virus or food poisoning, and we become ill. Can anybody think of another example? Let's erase this one so you don't have the cues on the board. Any other examples? Okay. A bell ringing in school. Tell me how that's an example. Okay, I see where you're going with this. At first, when you attend school, you don't know what the bell means. But as you see students begin to get up and move, then you become conditioned to, okay, I hear the bell, it's time for me to do something. So how can we apply this to us? Okay, let's say you hear a noise, and that noise makes you move to action. So hearing the noise is what? The unconditioned stimulus. Moving to action, the unconditioned response. Okay, so then the bell in school. The noise, the action. So at first, the bell is a neutral stimulus until you learn what it means. The noise, excuse me, wrong marker, I'm trying to color code these for you, is still an unconditioned stimulus, and the action is still an unconditioned response until you learn exactly what the bell means. So then, the bell rings, you're moved to action, because you have learned that the bell means it's time to switch classes, it's time to go somewhere new, it's time to go home for the day, or it's time to go to lunch. So the bell is what? It becomes the conditioned stimulus, and moving to action becomes the conditioned response.